going to be discussing Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel and Sicilian Cosa Nostra. Let's get into it. Pablo Escobar became the head of the Medellin cartel, arguably the most powerful drug trafficking organization in the world during the 80s and 90s. As far as his wealth, it's been reported to be in the billions. And just like Toto Riina and the Coglianesi, he resorted to terroristic tactics in an attempt to put fear in the government. As a result, he not only became public enemy number one in Colombia, but in the United States as well. And Pablo Escobar was fully aware the United States had him in their crosshairs. And at one time, he gave the following statement in regard to that. He'd rather have a grave in Colombia than a jail cell in the U.S. On December 2nd, 1993, the Colombian government granted his wishes. After having celebrated his 44th birthday the day before, his Medellin hideout was discovered by Colombian forces, who raided the building, and after a gunfight that took place on the building's roof, Pablo Escobar met his end. Before Giovanni Falcone's death on May 23, 1992, one of the last investigations he supervised, one he referred to as the Colombian-Sicilian deal, exposed a direct link between the Medellin cartel and Sicilian Cosa Nostra, specifically Pablo Escobar and Toto Riina. Strangely enough, Escobar, a psychopath in his own right, admired Toto Riina. According to Antonino Giuffre, right hand to Bernardo Provenzano, he was told by Provenzano that Toto Riina gave Escobar and the Medellin cartel advice on military strategy. This statement was echoed by Escobar's son, Juan Pablo, who stated, "My father was an observer and follower of Toto Riina, and clearly learned his violent methods from him. Both Escobar and Riina, besides being bosses, shared something else in common. Both their fathers were farmers, and Escobar admired the Italians so much that he even named the $63 million estate Hacienda Nápoles after Naples, Italy." In regard to Riina, Juan Pablo also said, "At the time, my father had an organization that brought him drugs into the United States. And according to Juan Pablo, his father would follow the news of Toto Riina and the bombing of Giovanni Falcone. At this time, although the Colombians flooded the United States with cocaine, they seeked a distribution network in Europe, which only the Sicilian Mafia could provide. Escobar and the Medellin cartel profited approximately $29 billion a year and were responsible for 80% of the cocaine entering the United States. These two major organizations understood their priority to be avoiding detection and money trails. They devised a barter scheme where they would exchange cocaine for heroin. And this system, although a good one, would not always be the case. Money would come into play as well. In some instances, they'd exchange 11 pounds of cocaine for 2 pounds of heroin. In 1986, Toto Riina called a high-level meeting in Palermo, Sicily. Among those in attendance were Vincenzo Galatolo, boss of Acquasanta, who happened to be a member of the Coglianesi death squad from the early 80s. His cousin, John Galatolo, traveled from Miami, where he lived since immigrating to the United States in the 60s, and his partner, Giuseppe Joe Cufaro. Also at this meeting was Francesco Mandonia, a Palermo boss who was an ally to the Coglianesi during their push for power against the other Palermo bosses. And his son Nino was also present. Toto Riina delegated the management in dealing with the Colombians to Mandonia and his son. Francesco Mandonia instructed John Galatolo to inquire about the price of cocaine with the Colombians. The Coglianesi wanted to monopolize the cocaine business in Europe. When Galatolo and Cufaro returned to Miami, they reached out to Rosario Naimo, Toto Riina's guy in the United States, and Paolo Laduca, a member of the Lucchese family, both of whom were big narcotic traffickers. Supposedly, Laduca forked over millions of his own to have some of the cocaine smuggled to him. He'd been sentenced for trafficking in absentia in Italy, and the Italian government asked the United States to arrest him, which they did in July 19, 1994. Naimo and Laduca put them in touch with two suppliers of the Medellin cartel, cousins Waldo and Angel Sanchez. The FBI happened to be surveilling both the Sicilians and the Colombians down in Miami, and they became extremely interested in both groups who were having a meeting under the Florida palm trees. Sanchez represented the Medellin cartel and Pablo Escobar. He was to work out the details for shipments of cocaine into Italy. Galatolo went over some stipulations the Sicilians had. First, the Colombians had to supply large shipments only by sea. They didn't want to deal with couriers. They also wanted any ships transporting the cocaine to Italy, when unloaded, to be refilled with heroin, and then delivered to the United States. Most likely, the heroin was for Naimo and Laduca. In addition, the Sicilians wanted the Colombians to exclusively deal with them. Galatolo explained to Sanchez if the Colombians wanted to traffic any cocaine in Europe, they had to go through the Sicilians. A short time later, a second meeting took place, and Sanchez told Galatolo his organization accepted the stipulations. In 1987, a shipment was sent from Colombia and successfully landed near a beach in Agrigento, Sicily. The payment for that load was in the neighborhood of $15 million. Galatolo explained that it would take some time to move that amount of cocaine in Italy. The Colombians were charging $20,000 a kilo. Shortly after the delivery, Galatolo kept his word and paid what was owed. A second shipment was loaded on a ship named Finesse, but it was seized by Spanish and Portuguese law enforcement, who discovered the hidden 146 kilos. Joe Cafaro's role was to ensure that any money transactions went smoothly. Galatolo, on the other hand, and according to the FBI, was the ambassador who dealt with international organizations. Galatolo passed himself off in Miami as a pizzeria owner. However, he was a member of Sicilian Cosa Nostra living in the United States. He owned a horse farm and the luxurious beachfront villa in Dade County and would drive a black Mercedes. Speaking of Miami, Pablo Escobar also had a mansion in Miami Beach. In January 1988, a rundown merchant ship named Big John that was registered in Chile and flew a Chilean flag was being prepared for another shipment. The ship was docked in Aruba, where the 596 kilos of Colombian cocaine were hidden in spaces between the bulkheads. The ship's main cargo would be manure. So there was a lot of shit on that boat. The ship sailed from Aruba through the Straits of Gibraltar and into the Mediterranean Sea. It arrived off the beaches of Castamata del Golfo, where the drugs were offloaded onto trucks carrying wine. In December 1988, Joe Cafaro, Galatolo's right-hand man, was arrested for unrelated trafficking and began cooperating with law enforcement. Prosecuting magistrate Giovanni Falcone traveled to a Florida FBI safe house from Sicily to question Cafaro. Documents state that Cafaro was extremely talkative and gave details of the Sicilian-Colombian drug alliance. He supplied prosecutors with a half a dozen slides of photos that showed the cocaine being loaded on an island in Aruba. Most likely, he was directed by the Sicilians to go to Aruba and keep track of the shipment. According to Cafaro, it was Nino Mandonia who paid for the load. The money ultimately would be sent to Panama, and it was paid in 3 installments and loaded onto fruit trucks owned by the Mandonias. The money was then driven to Milan to a financial company named Fimo. The company then transferred the money to Luxembourg, where it was moved to RCG Enterprise in Los Angeles, California. RCG Enterprise then deposited the money into a Panamanian bank account where the Colombians could withdraw it. Cafaro told investigators that back in January 1988, the day the cocaine was expected to arrive in Sicily, John Galatolo, his uncle Vincenzo, and him were in a Palermo restaurant. At some point, a young kid pulled up on a motorcycle. He got off the bike and knocked on the restaurant's window. Vincenzo Galatolo went outside to speak with the kid. When he returned, he said, "It's done." The shipment of cocaine had arrived, and he got the waiter and ordered champagne so they could celebrate. As part of the Coglianesi business structure, they had hired accountants. Bank accounts were set up in more than 10 countries, tax havens. They created ghost companies that used false invoices and had their money placed in the London and Frankfurt stock exchanges. The Sicilians quadrupled their original investments in their business venture with the Colombians, which lasted from 1985 to 1989. The ironic part is, the bosses from Palermo referred to the Coglianesi as farmers. I think most would disagree. Not a bad racket for a bunch of farmers. I hope everyone enjoyed this video. Please remember to hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed, you could do that as well. I want to welcome all the new subscribers to the channel, and I thank everyone who has subscribed. If you think friends and family might enjoy this video, please share it, and I thank you. Again, you can find Ratchet's website down in the description of this video. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their weekend, and I'll catch you on the next one.